Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to just quickly say thank you so much for everybody that's registered for this webinar, and thank you for attending. We're really excited about the webinar today around DRTV and video, hosted by WPNC and Action for Children. We are super excited, and thank you, everybody. Next slide, Brendan. Before I hand over to Dan, I'd just like to say that we are a community. We join together with really lots of different diverse expertise and talents, but we did join as a collective. But also we've got to remember these are hard times. We've still got some hard times ahead of us. This is one of the reasons why we did build the collective through different talents and expertise to help what we would see as the entire community of the social good sector. And I think, we've got, as I said, some challenging times ahead still. It's not going to be easy. So it really will mean that together, and it needs to be together, we can make anything possible anywhere. So I'm a very optimistic person. I think there's so much good stuff that's going out even in these hard times. And this is what the community is about, is to be, a community and support one another. Next slide. Just before I hand over, just to kind of remind people, any questions, please just use the Q&A. We're going to try and do two different things. First of all, respond to any questions you have live through the Q&A on the webinar. But also we're going to allow 10 minutes to answer any questions that we can't answer on the Q&A, because they might mean or need different explanations. So on that note, thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoy it. I'm really excited about this. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Keith. Let me just share my screen with you guys. Great. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Just want to say good morning. Thanks for attending. What we're going to be talking about today is the opportunities that exist for video, film and TV for charities at the moment. Before we get into the content, just want to introduce you to our team. So it's myself, I'm the Digital Strategy Director at WPNC. We have Maria and Bob, who are going to be doing a bit of a double act. I'm sure they won't mind me saying that they're both very experienced in the making of content for TV and film and video. So they're going to look at the craft. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Behind the scenes there, we also have John Eversley in the background, who'll be helping with the Q&A at the end. And we're also very delighted to have Susan Davidson from Action for Children as our guest today to talk a bit about their campaign. So without further ado, let's get into the content. So this morning, So this morning, what we're going to cover is a short slot, which I'm going to do, which is on the media landscape and what we can see from audience behaviour at the moment. Clearly, we're not living in ordinary times, so things are changing, and we wanted just to cover what that looks like. Then Maria will talk about what sort of best practice looks like in the new normal, if we can even call it that. So how can we apply what we know about TV and video fundraising, but in the current context? Then Bob will take over to look at how to get TV and video made practically right now, because clearly a lot of the ways that we might make TV and video ordinarily simply aren't available to us. So what can we do at the moment? And then Susan for Action for Children will look at their new DRTV campaign, which I believe is airing today, so it's brand new, and look at what that entailed. And then, as Keith said, we'll have the Q&A at the end. So what's going on in the landscape that we can see? Well, just to sort of cover off probably what most of us here know, there's a bunch of channels that we would ordinarily use for fundraising that simply are off limits right now. So face-to-face, clearly that's down, shut down completely, not something we can do. Mass challenge events equally are cancelled or delayed. Physical community fundraising, obviously that's against social distancing guidance, so that's next to impossible. And out of home is still available, but obviously the value of that is diminished. Cinema, nobody can go to the cinema. And we're also seeing that in the printed media, whilst there was a bit of a strong surge at the beginning, that now seems to be tailing off. Which leads us obviously to look at the channels that are available to us. And what we're seeing there is actually that the opportunities that exist are perhaps bigger than they were before. And the media owners are offering that at lower budgets than previously due to the amount of inventory that they now have to offer. And what that means for charity fundraisers is that TV and video on demand are a good option. Obviously, digital has many opportunities. Audio and radio are now back on the landscape as good opportunities. Clearly, all the newspapers and news brands have online properties that we can use. And then there's going straight to the home. So, direct mail and partially addressed mail are open to us. Clearly, the postal service is working really hard to stay completely operational. And we have door drops too, so we can get into the home. And I think that's probably the main point to understand is that all of those media opportunities get into the individual's home, which is where they are right now. So before we go into what that media opportunity it looks like practically, I think it's really important just to make sure that we always stay audience first and really reflect what's happening in our supporters' lives. So what I'm going to do is just look through some data points that can help us understand what's happening. The point that I think to make that we're seeing is that the thirst for information that we saw at the beginning of the lockdown period is subsiding somewhat and being replaced by a desire to help as people understand the impact and they can see the need that is out there. And understanding the sort of how to be relevant as an organization, as a fundraiser, and what the context of your audience's lives are like at the moment will be the keys to unlocking how to kind of harness that desire to help towards your cause. So often when we're trying to look at what behaviors out there, we'll use things like Google Trends and search. Search is a great way to gather information about what people are sort of what their sort of informational demands and needs are. So what we can see here, taking a Google Trends snapshot from the past 90 days, as of 2 days ago when I took these screen grabs, United Kingdom only in Google search. Phrases that included the keyword coronavirus help, as you can see, during the initial lockdown period, were really high on the index, and people looking to figure out things like how they could get financial help and support, help with isolation, help with looking after others. Those are the kind of phrases that we see during that period. But as you can notice, looking down the curve as we get to today, what we're seeing is that informational need subsiding. Looking at terms to do with the NHS, what we can see is two upward curves. One at the beginning of lockdown, people looking to understand things like symptoms. What is this virus all about? And now what we're seeing over the past few days is again an uptick on searches, including NHS, but now it's more about how to help in the mix. What is the Thursday clap all about? How can I get involved in things? So a need in the audience to find out how to participate. Looking at terms that include the word charity, what we see here is a gradual decline from the beginning of the year, which we'd expect ordinarily as the Christmas fundraising period tails off. with a low period during the lockdown, presumably as people get distracted in part by the news cycle around COVID. But interesting, what we've seen at the last few days is an uptick in charity. As you can see, that highest data point on the 100 index, that's the top, being just a couple of days ago. So people starting to look for ways to engage with charities. And lastly, phrases that include the word donate have seen an enormous uptake in the last week or so. Part of that is skewed by Captain Tom and his fantastic efforts. But I think, the main takeaway from this is that even if those searches are towards things like Captain Tom and those large scale things that have been covered largely in the media, it's people's desire to get involved and help that we should take away from that. So that's what's going on in the demands of our audiences. What are the opportunities in the media landscape that we can use? So I wanted to show you this study by Global Web Index. So this is brand news from April, covering both the US and the UK, importantly. So it's data from both those territories. What we can see is across the board, the different age brackets and different types of individuals are showing a considerable increase in their media consumption and the kinds of things that we can use to show advertising to people in aid of our causes. So things like watching TV, movies, listening to music online, searching are all up. If you look, and obviously we'll circulate this, and there'll be a link to this study. The people probably that we're most interested in at the moment are the boomers, who are probably our more traditional audiences for fundraising, but also Gen X and millennials even, who ordinarily aren't at home, for instance, and ordinarily aren't watching TV, particularly terrestrial broadcast TV, are doing so now. So that's really important when we start talking about DRTV. And there's a bunch of reasons why it's more attractive, as I said towards the beginning of the slot. TV viewing is up by about 50 more minutes per day across the board, and where we're getting information from lots of media partners to give us confidence that this is true. Daytime's up, including children, of course, but adults too. And over on the advertiser owner side, what we're seeing is a lot of the brands who would ordinarily advertise in some of this media inventory aren't doing it for commercial reasons. And ordinarily, as we approach the sort of spring and summer, we'd get large sporting events that aren't taking place anymore, which would usually command a good portion of that media. And as a result of this, prices are being cut, which obviously is a good news for charity advertisers. And that's something that we can start to talk to media owners and media agencies about how to make the most of that. Moving on to the online side of things, what we can see here is that the headline is that people are using social media more than ever. We can see people participating in groups, for instance, around local support for COVID as well. So there's people out there on social media trying to use that platform to be useful. There's lots more, as we're doing today, lots more video messaging, lots more participation in group activities online. Voice and video, for instance, on WhatsApp has more than doubled compared to last year. And when it comes to sort of more entertainment and consumption, we see 39% of people streaming more online video than normal. Similarly to TV, what we're seeing is that the media is cheaper too. So ads are cheaper in social. We're seeing that around the 25 to 50% lower than usual price point for social media advertising. So that's clearly useful to us. And video is one of the predominant formats now, particularly in things like Facebook. So certainly what we saw pre-lockdown, and it continues, is that if we're looking to Facebook and Instagram in particular, they give preferential treatment to video content in terms of performance metrics. even these days, you would expect that the video format might be limited to views. Actually, it's generating more clicks than even static imagery. So that's really useful to know when we're thinking about how we're going to use video content for our fundraising. But crucially, we can talk as much as we want about the media landscape being preferential to us at the moment, but it only works if the content is right. You know, what you say, to who, and how you say it are the fundamental things to get right to achieve success. And that's what we want to dedicate the next 20 to 25 minutes doing on this webinar, to show you about the craft of putting the right message together in these difficult circumstances, and obviously show you a fantastic example of that with Action for Children's new TV campaign. So having said that, over to Maria, who's going to talk to you about the creative approach to film, video, and DRTV. And at this point, I think Bob's going to take over the screen share.
Thank you for that, Dan. Hello, everybody. Great to be here talking to you. So for the next 25 minutes or so, Bob and I are going to hopefully be inspiring you, all with really from the creative perspective, because that's what we do. We make the ads, we write the ads. I have to be honest with you, they don't normally let us creative types loose on client seminars, let alone webinars. So please be gentle with us. The most important thing is that I've handed over the clicking to Bob. So if anything goes wrong, you can blame him. Okay, Bob? Click away. Thank you very much. I came across this quote from an article, actually it was supplied by a client, about framing comms and messaging around the coronavirus. It's a really interesting article. I can recommend it to anybody. I think it really applies to us fundraisers and us creative people who work with fundraisers too. This is such an interesting moment for storytelling. Obviously, terrible, terrible things are going on in the world. But in terms of telling the stories, we're having to think in new ways. And that's really what makes it so exciting. We've got to tell our stories differently to engage an audience that is frankly very distracted at the moment. And of course, we've got to film it differently because we don't have access to camera people. We don't have access to voiceover artists and all the editing facilities from wherever they come from. So right now at WPNC, we're producing ads for broadcast television, and then we're making them using iPhones, iPads. We're getting people to film in their own homes. We're using project workers as voiceover artists, you know, as opposed to actors. It feels really raw. It feels really immediate, and it's really emotional. So hopefully we'll be giving you lots of inspiration today to make you go away and think that, well, maybe I can do it in this way, and actually produce ads that work better than ever before. So before we get into the practicalities, which is what Bob's going to be talking to you about, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the key creative principles that we apply to our fundraising, DRTV and films. Okay, so we are simple souls in creative, and the way we express it is heart, head, and hand. And at this point, if it was in person, I'd be doing this sort of, but you can imagine. What do we mean by that? So we've actually used these 3 principles for many years now, and they work incredibly well. So ignore them at your peril. It's about 3 key things. It's about emotional engagement. It's about connecting with your cause, and it's about getting people to take action. Now, all 3 of these elements are really, really important. And we think that during this current time, it still holds true, in fact, more so than ever. So let's just take a little closer look at them. So heart is obviously about harnessing people's emotions, and film, whether it's TV or online video, it's just the most emotional of mediums, as we all know. It can make us sad, it can make us happy, it can uplift us. In fundraising terms, it's often about making an audience feel a little bit sad and wanting to do something to help people. But emotion alone is not enough to get people to dig into their pockets or sign with us. That's where the head comes in, and that's all about the rational argument. It's really about you and your cause. Why your cause? Why do you need funds, and why now? And then by hand, well, that's actually about getting people to pick up their phones and to take action now. And that's the hardest bit of all. And in some ways, for creatives, it's the least interesting, but it's so blooming important, because to engage somebody emotionally and rationally is fine and dandy. But if you don't get them to go online and actually, you know, give you a gift, or pick up their phone and give you a gift, you're not going to get anywhere, particularly with DRTV. So it's a really, really important part of our strategy. And that's where good old technique plays a strong part. And we'll explain that in a little while. So we're always looking for a strong combination of all three in our TV and online executions. Okay, thank you. However, everything's going mad at the minute. I mean, what's going on? What a roller coaster. It's a very emotional time. You know, I don't know about you, but I dread the daily Downing Street briefings and, you know, the news of more deaths. But then, you know, we're all inspired by our really heroic NHS workers. We're all going stir crazy with only ourselves for company, but we're connecting more with our families than we ever did before, via Zoom and house party, etc., etc. You know, and then there's lovely Captain Tom. You know, in a time of furloughs and financial uncertainty, I think he's now at around the £30 million mark. So people have got a huge capacity to give in the current climate. We just need to get the triggers right. Okay, so let's look at heart, head and hand in our crazy new world. So it's the same principles, but we think we need to dig a little bit deeper as to how they work today. So this is all about emotion, and we all know this is a time of heightened emotion. So we really need to use language and visuals mindfully, especially with film, because film is such a powerfully emotional medium. And something that we found long before coronavirus was, if we create films and DRTV that have too much sadness, too much despair, too much anger, it is going to impact on people responding. It almost freezes them. We need to make them feel, but we need them to get them to want to do something, to take action. So it does feel that in the current situation, when there is so much despair around and uncertainty, our language and tone should evoke something a little bit softer, a bit more empathetic, you know, more collaborative. So we're talking about care, togetherness, common good, hope. So it's not about fear, scaremongering, division, and this sense of helplessness, because if people feel helpless, they won't want to give and support you. I think the key thing here is that sense of togetherness, because let's be honest, we're all stuck in isolation, which is why we're all reaching out for each other in lots and lots of new ways. So the togetherness feels really important. And that, for me personally, is a very interesting shift for DRTV, because DRTV historically has always been one-on-one. You can save a child's life, as opposed to together we can save lives. So it's that difference between me doing the thing on my own, but I can be part of something a little bit bigger. And I think that's an interesting shift. And I think what's very interesting at the moment is that we can explore this sense of togetherness with all the human stories that are everywhere at the moment. And there's really interesting inspiration. You know, you go online and you're inundated with them. You watch breakfast TV and it's full of people telling their stories from their own home. We're all connecting with each other. We're all hearing each other's stories. So the question is, can we use this sort of shared humanity, this moment in time, to add emotion and connection to perhaps your appeal films? Can it help you tell your story in a different way? And I'd like to show you a really nice example now, which is from the Co-op.
Strange times these, aren't they? I know, but even though we can't be in the same room,
we can still pull together
and help those in need.
Can you hear me? We want to get behind Fair Share.
The food charity.
And we're making it easy
for us all to do our bit to be a local hero. Co-op has pledged £1.5 million worth of food to kick it off.
You can donate money in store today,
or by texting meals to 70490 to give a tenner.
because even though we're apart, we can still help each other out.
Okay, I think that's a really sweet little advert. It's fresh, it's different, and you know, to be blunt, it's cheap. It's got a lot going on in it, lots of sort of raw stuff, but it's really simple and it's got a really simple message to it. And I think, you know, simplicity is key at the moment. Simplicity and cut-through, really important. Okay, so moving on, well, let's talk about, we've done heart, let's talk about head, which is really all about the new rational. And this is about you and your cause. So if you're going out of an appeal in the next few weeks, whether it's online or whether it's on DRTV, I really think you need to think about why us, why now, and what's the message to our audience. And by the way, we found that just at the start of the lockdown, and even just before, we were running our traditional adverts that had been running for many months. And they just, you know, ones that had been working very well, and they just weren't working so well anymore. You know, people were just not engaging with traditional messages, fundraising messages at a time of such change. So, you know, if you do have successful DRTV ads, you know, out there that have been working for years, we do feel now is the time to start to think about what you can do to update them and make that message more pertinent to what's going on now. And Bob's got some really simple suggestions later on. We do feel that you need to look at them, but get out there and make it happen. You know, don't be afraid. Don't hide away and think, well, I'll just pull off TV and I won't do any social funds at the moment because I'm not necessarily connected to coronavirus. You know, you've got to be a bit mindful of sounding opportunistic. That is something to be really cautious of. But don't be afraid to ask for what you need. If you need those funds, get out there and do it, because people will help. Another important point to think about is this whole element of the journey. You know, we're all on a journey, and we don't know, we've had the start, but we don't know where it's going, and we don't know when it's going to end. But, you know, every day feels a little bit different. So when you're making your film, your TV ad, when you're writing it, think about when it's going to be aired and what point of the journey we're at. So right now for us at WPMC, we're actually beginning to plan emergency adverts for a few weeks' time, when hopefully lockdown might be beginning to end, or we're coming out of it slightly. So really you need to think about your messaging. So I'm seeing a lot of, you know, ads. Well, there was a shelter ad which aired quite early on in the process, which was around the theme of the lockdown is going on, we're overwhelmed by calls, please help us. And that's normally a very strong cash ask. You know, whereas if you're planning for the weeks ahead, it could be with the end in sight, we must be ready for increased strains on our services. And what that means is it might give you the opportunity to go out with a regular giving ask, because you're going to be facing a lot of uncertainty and a lot of hard work in the future. So you're asking your donor, you're asking your supporter for that extra help over the months to come. So really think about where you are on your journey as you write your creative. And then the final point, now more than ever, we believe is the time to put a human face to your charity. And this is something that I feel really passionately about, because in a normal DRTV ad, the whole mission part of the advert from the charity is delivered by a voiceover artist. And we always try and match that voiceover artist with the, you know, the ethos and the passion of the organisation. But you don't quite get the sense of the personality. Well, right now, you've got the perfect opportunity. You've got project workers, you've got chief execs, you've got people who work for your organisation. They're all holed up at home, so they've really got no excuse not to front appeals for you. And we're doing quite a few of those at the moment, and we think they're really, really powerful. And what we're getting them to do, and Bob will explain a bit later, is we're getting them to phone themselves on the phone, to make the appeal on their own phone. Send it to us and we put it together with existing footage. And it immediately gives that human face. So what I'd like to do now is show you an example of an advert we have currently on air. It's for Médecins Sans Frontières. We were a little bit lucky in that we filmed it literally just before lockdown. But the international president of MSF, who's an incredibly important person, and we would never normally have access to him, had been grounded, as had all the doctors. And he actually was staying in a flat in Clapham. We have to say, we shamelessly took advantage of it. So we wrote an emergency script on the Thursday, we filmed him in his home on the Friday, we started editing over the weekend, we had it ready to send to Clearcast the following week. You know, the edit does look a little bit rough and ready, and we think that's a really, really good thing at the moment. You know, rough and ready is good. It gives that sense of emergency and living in the moment. So, Bob, could we have a look at that, please?
We've all been affected by this coronavirus pandemic. It has touched our families, our friends, and our communities. The patients in MSF care are already the most vulnerable people in the world. That's why I'm asking for your help today. We face huge challenges, including moving our doctors and nurses to where they are urgently needed and ensuring we have essential medical supplies. Our urgent priority is providing care for communities who already live in very difficult conditions. We are doing our best to keep our existing projects running while preparing for what may come. With our determined efforts, and your support, we can find solutions. This is a global health emergency, and acting in emergencies is in our blood. So we are asking for your help today, because without it, we simply can't maintain our life-saving work during this global emergency. Please search MSF Pandemic now to give £30. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you could hear that okay there. Now, obviously, MSF is a charity that is very closely connected. It's a medical charity, so it is closely connected to epidemics and pandemics and their response. Just to say, later on, we'll be talking about the fact that you don't need to have that direct connection. You can still go out with their ask and be, your ask and be just as pertinent and, and just as strong. Anyway, the ad's doing really well, and we're actually looking to update it because, as you'll see from the language in that, in terms of the journey, that was created pretty much at the start, and now hopefully we'll have more information, we'll have more footage that we can share and we can update it. And it's that sense of being in the moment that I think is really powerful. Bob, would you mind clicking on? Thank you. Okay, so this is my final slide. What do we mean by the new action? And this is where the hand comes in. It's about getting people to take action now, not tomorrow. And that urgency clearly applies more than ever in our current situation. I mean, I don't think anybody can think beyond today or tomorrow anyway. But hopefully with your messaging and the rough and ready feel of your edits, which I really feel are very important, it's all going to add to that immediacy. There are some practical considerations that you probably ought to think of. I'm sure you are thinking of them. I'll just raise them now. So, what is your call to action? If you're doing a fundraising DRTV ad or online, what's your call to action? Is it PSMS? Is it phone? Is it web? They may all be applicable. What I would say is we tend to always lead on one. We might include others, but we lead on one. So that MSF advert was very much about searching, but we did include a phone number as an option. So that's something to bear in mind. Cash, of course, is king at the moment. People want to give now and they want to help now. So it feels, for emergency appeals, it's the right way to go. And higher amounts, I mean, that MSF advert is asking for £30, which is a heck of a lot in the current climate. But it has a very good reason to ask for that. And MSF find that higher gifts really do work well for them. Having said cash is king, as I said earlier, it could be that RG, and I know every charity wants it to be about RG. If we get our messaging right for going forward, we're not going to be coming out of this anytime soon. So perhaps now is a real time to really start thinking about your regular giving message and getting people to really engage with that over the months ahead. And then the next thing is to consider your keyword, your search word, your hashtag. It was interesting what Dan was showing earlier about what people are searching for. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be generic. You don't want to go out there with just coronavirus or something like that. What charities like MSF do is they prefix. So their search word is MSF pandemic. So think about things like that really kind of tie it down to you. In terms of keywords for when you're texting PSMS, personally, I really like to use really positive, simple keywords. So text food, text care, text soap, something really simple and really easy to get for the audience, and something positive. It's a positive thing that they're doing, and just the act of typing out a positive word we think is a very good thing. Now is not the time for subtle captioning. This is something that I really feel strongly about, and a lot of creatives and dare I say fundraisers sometimes like to go with very delicate captioning and sort of being slightly apologetic for asking for money. No. Everyone is very distracted at the moment, so be really bold, be very upfront and be urgent. Let people know what you want of them right from the outset. It feels really, really important. And then finally, consider framing your film as an appeal. It works. People immediately understand what it's about, that it's about funds. It feels tangible and it feels immediate. So I'd just like to show you one last ad from me. I think it's a really nice example. I only saw it last week, actually. I think it launched on Thursday. You've probably seen it. It's the 1 million claps appeal for the NHS. We didn't do it. I wish we had. I think it's a really nice thought. It's a really simple emotional thought. And what it is, of course, it's taken on board that clap that we all do every Thursday that we're going to be doing tonight, and just turns it into a really, really simple kind of fundraising mechanism, harness, expression. It's the perfect keyword, clap, and it does it to raise 1 million claps and a lot of money for the NHS. So let's have a look at it, Bob.
Oh.
Just while Bob's finding it, I'm very envious of the music they were able to use for it, because I bet they didn't have to pay. You got sound?
We clap to say thank you.
Because you're amazing.
Because you look after us.
And we want to look after you too.
Text CLAP followed by your message of support to 70507 to give £5 now. 100% of your donation will support our NHS heroes and will send you a message to your local NHS hospital. Let's get 1 million claps for our NHS heroes. Text your clap now.
And I don't think you actually heard the music for that, actually, but it's We Will Rock You by Queen, and it's We Will Clap You or something like that, or We Will Thank You, but it's used in a really, really powerful way. You didn't really get the full force of that, so have a look at it online. It'll probably be on TV tonight anyway, but again, it's really, I think it's really strong. So hopefully, my bit was hopefully sort of inspiring you, getting you to think about your own causes and the wider messages and principles that can apply to you. I'm going to hand over to Bob now, who's going to talk to you about the practical bits about making the films amazing.
Thanks, Maria. So I'm just going to take a few moments to talk through some practical solutions for people who want to get some film made and get online or on air, and how to get over the challenges posed by the current situation and the lockdown. So I'm going to be looking at essentially 4 different routes, and they really are depending on the sort of material that you have available to you right away. So the easiest route is obviously when you have some sort of DRTV ad already made, and then I'm going to walk through right to where you have the need to make something completely new. I also want to share some thoughts about planning ahead, either for emergencies like this or for your exit strategy when the current lockdown starts to come to an end. So let's take the easiest route to start with, which is when you already have a DRTV ad made. And if you do, then there are several easy options that you can consider. As was discussed earlier, one option is just to put that ad back on air right away. As Dan was saying, there are bigger than ever daytime audiences, they're watching for longer, and prices are lower. So you could do worse than just put your ad back on air now. Second option is to take that ad and create a new edit with minimal changes. So for example, you could do a sort of top and tail to it with captions and voiceover, or you could film, or you could film a top and tail, and I'm going to talk about filming in isolation in a moment. Another way that we often find works is to go back to the rushes from your original shoot and look at all the footage that wasn't used in your original ad and see if you can construct a new emergency ad, which has the advantage of being more bespoke and more on message. So the pros of this are, well, you get on air pretty quickly, and obviously you have a sort of benchmark of your performance. Cons, well, not totally new and not bespoke to the emergency context. I just want to show you an example of an ad we've made for our client Children with Cancer UK.
This is an urgent appeal for Children with Cancer UK to ask for your help during this difficult time. My own daughter Matilda had cancer, so I know how vulnerable these children are, especially now facing the added threat of infection. Please, don't forget the children with cancer in the midst of this pandemic. Watch this appeal now. When you're told your child has cancer, There are so many difficult moments ahead. But there's one moment that every family longs to share. The moment their child finishes cancer treatment and rings the special bell that means they can go home together as a family. But not every child gets to ring the bell, and not every family gets to stay together. That's why Children with Cancer UK need your help today. Our vital research saves children's lives and keeps families together. We receive no government funding. We rely on you. Will you give £3 today? It could help us find new cures and develop kinder, more effective treatments. Text BELL to 70030 to give just £3. Let's make sure more children can ring the bell. Please, help children with cancer during this pandemic. Donate now. Thank you.
So what we did here is when the original ad was made, the actor Kay Ragg was the voiceover artist, and we knew that she had a child who had suffered with cancer. So for our emergency appeal, we went back to her and asked her to film herself at home, and we created a 90-second ad with her topping and tailing her original voiceover ad. Just a couple of thoughts about filming in isolation. Obviously, there are challenges here, but I think there are ways around it. So firstly, we'd recommend you film in homes, not in studios or offices, because obviously you need to be seen to be responsible about this. Using non-professional equipment like mobile phones is absolutely acceptable, and I think we're all being surprised by the quality that's available from these pieces of equipment. Obviously, when you're doing this, the production values are not going to be at the same level as they would in the normal world, but that's exactly what people are expecting right now, so you should embrace it. And of course, editing and sound and graphics and playouts and clearcast can all be done by professionals working remotely. So going this way gets you new content that's on message, and but you are taking a hit on the production values. Oh, and just a thought about using camera phones, a couple of things to remember. Firstly, obviously, most smartphones are portraits in format, and of course TV is a landscape, so it's important to rotate your phone when you're filming with it. It's better not to have very wobbly cam footage, so put your camera or your phone on a hard surface. It's better to have a level shot as opposed to a selfie looking down into the phone. For editing purposes, it's better to do your shot quite wide. So for example, from the waist up. And what that means in the editing process, we can move in or blow it up for a closer shot. Your eye line should be direct to camera because it's very distracting when someone is not looking at camera when they're speaking to you. It's best to have a simple background in a room with soft furnishings so you don't get too much echo, and it's good to avoid having your presenters back to the window as it puts their face in shadow. Ideally, what we do is we try to get the presenter to do some test takes and send it in, and so we can correct any problems before we go for the real thing. Anyway, our second starting point is when you have your own footage and still image assets, but not a ready-made DRTV ad. So one way to go about this is just to write a script for an emergency themed ad, trawl through all your existing assets and assemble a matching film, and buy in any necessary extra video stills from image libraries or news outlets. So what's good about this is obviously it's bespoke to your organization and message. The cons are, you know, don't underestimate the time it takes to trawl through all your video or still image assets. That can be very time consuming. And finally, starting point 3 is about creating something completely new. So this may seem daunting, but there are ways around it. So first thing to do is to write your script for an emergency themed ad, and then you can buy in necessary footage from image libraries or news outlets, and on top of that you can apply your own brand graphics and typography and tone of voice, and then record a voiceover remotely. I would suggest also that you could consider motion graphics or animation as an alternative, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So the positive things about this version is you have a bespoke message in the emergency context, and the problems are obviously the cost of sourcing the footage or stills and the time it takes to do that. Just a thought on using motion graphics. So motion graphics, what I mean by that is essentially moving graphic design, and the joy of it is it can be combined with lots of other elements to create dynamic movement for film, whether it's online or on TV. So you can combine it with existing images or artwork, stock images, or three-dimensional work. And actually the production times don't need to be quite as long as you might imagine. So 2 to 3 weeks in the production phase is possible. You could also consider animation, and that can be, you know, there's loads of different styles of animation open to you. And that can be a really simple way to create a complete suite of assets that you can use across different platforms, but it does take longer than motion graphics. So the advantages are you get a bespoke message with complete control, and the disadvantages are perhaps motion graphics and animation are not as immediately emotional as live film. So I just want to take a moment to think about some preparedness for emergencies. So obviously it's too late for the start of this emergency, but for your exit strategy and for future emergencies, this is a way that we talk to people about getting prepared so you can get on air or online as quickly as possible. So basically the process is you start by creating a template for your emergency themed ad. You get all your interested internal parties to sign off on that template in advance, and then you pre-assemble as much of the ad as possible. We would aim at 80 or 90% done. You also can take this opportunity to sound out Clearcast to try and preempt any issues. Also, identify voiceover artists you'd like to use. You need to have several lined up who are readily available, and agree the emergency process in advance. And then, when the emergency occurs, buy in the missing 10 to 20% of footage to identify the emergency theme and build that around your pre-assembled template ad. So the advantage of this is it really is the fastest route to air with a bespoke message and a film. The disadvantages are obviously you need to have planned ahead, but I would say there is still time to plan for the exit strategy from the current lockdown. So that's all from me. Now what I'd like to do is hand over to Susan Davidson from Action for Children, who's going to talk to you about their terrific new ad, which went live, I believe, at 9:27 this very morning. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, hopefully it is. I haven't seen the spot, but yes, we hopefully aired at 9:27 this morning. So I'm just going to talk about our very live experience of creating a TV ad for our emergency appeal. So just the first slide, Bob, would be great. So yeah, I'll just set up with a little bit of context. So just before the lockdown, we did launch an emergency appeal. This is the first time that Action for Children have ever done this. We have a lot of people, well, some of my team and myself have worked in overseas development charities, so are familiar with doing emergency appeals, obviously never thought that we would be doing one ourselves in the UK. So how times have changed. So we basically launched an appeal, and it was basically with our website. So it was very, very digital focused and relying heavily on digital fundraising and working very closely with our media team. So really riding the wave of what media either we could react to or create ourselves. So we didn't have obviously anything prepared. So we basically, as was just talked about, looked at what current assets that we had. Now, we were going to be running an Easter appeal, and actually a lot of the content for that was extremely relevant. So we basically took that content and repurposed it. So created our digital fundraising campaign, and within the first week, the response just was outstanding, and was far stronger than our best Christmas cash appeal. So really, really, really positive ROI. So this spurred us on basically to do more. Obviously, at the same time as we were doing this, like many of us working in charities, we are monitoring our unrestricted income, looking at some channels being closed off and opportunities being closed to us, and really racking our brains for, well, actually, how can we make more opportunity for our fundraising? So this is where we sort of did a review of how the appeal was going, and then just look for, well, actually, what are, what opportunities are out there to make this appeal go further and to scale it. So DRTV seemed an obvious choice. So just on our objectives, and this is actually in the priority order. So so firstly, basically the KPI, it had to achieve a positive ROI. So we put together a business case, and for to justify TV, especially in the current context, we had to put the business case together and justify that actually that we would obviously bring in the money. Secondly, obviously to bring in new supporters to Action for Children. We all need new supporters, and actually Action for Children does, especially because our supporter file isn't that large. And then a third benefit, and obviously this is the benefit of TV, that actually you can reach people and sort of drive some awareness of your cause. And actually for Action for Children, our awareness is really low. Actually spontaneous awareness is actually zero, so we've got a lot to do. So that's just an added benefit of TV for us, but primarily it's all about the money. Was the key KPI. So thank you, Bob. The next one. So yes, so the agency brief. So we had our business case, so then it was pulling together a brief, and obviously we had some a social video some content that was really working, that we were getting great results from. So basically the idea was, actually, can we make a DRTV ad out of that content? So obviously the reality of the reality of the work that Action for Children does for working with children and their families actually is really quite distressing. And I've personally found it very emotional, hearing the stories, from our frontline staff. So actually in a TV context, we just have to be really quite mindful of that. And it was just what Maria was implying before, it is a fine line. So so actually to engage people, we don't obviously want to be too distressing, and also we just have to avoid the watershed. So for TV, we just have to be mindful of that. And then for the brief, simplicity, getting our message over sort of clearly and simply is critically important. And actually we're very fortunate to have a very simple proposition for this current context. So focusing on the key messages, which you'll see in the ad a little bit later. So it was all around getting the basic essentials to the children and families that desperately need it, need things now. So getting babies nappies, and children getting food, etc. So the proposition was help provide emergency essentials to the most deprived children and their families during the COVID crisis. So quite simple, and something we really did just want to get across. So this is a mandatory on the brief, that basically we wanted to sort of make clear that actually we've got our workers on the ground actually helping you know, in communities, and actually we just needed to basically get across that actually we have relationships with, you know, these children and these families, and these are the people that we want to help. So thank you, Bob. Just the next slide. So the tricky bit, was actually just making it happen. So it was great we had this idea, but actually, you know, we were all in lockdown, all shut in our homes. So just on the logistics of thinking, okay, we want to get on air. I mean, you know, 3 weeks ago, it just seemed mind-boggling. How are we going to do it? So I'm very, very lucky to work with a very, very determined team. And internally, our senior management and our chief exec was absolutely extraordinary. So they were very, very, very supportive of us on the emergency appeal, and made themselves very, very accessible. You know, for very, very quick sign off, very, very quick turnaround, and supporting us with getting the TV campaign on air. And importantly, just the team that has been working on it. We've been working directly with somebody who works in children's services, so actually really, really understands the work that we do with children, so that we can be, you know, as authentic and as real and as we possibly can be. So that was immensely helpful to us in fundraising. And also internally, just to get the commitment about filming, you know, via an iPhone. So you'll see our deputy chief exec, you'll see her in the film that we created. You know, she agreed to actually to do this. So that was another commitment we needed. So very, very importantly, especially for TV, I think the make or break of it is basically the partners that will help a client do this. So because TV, you know, you do need experts to help you. I would highly recommend that you know, you go with somebody who has a lot of experience with direct response TV and with charities. So firstly, securing media opportunities. So we work with a media agency that does absolutely understand direct response TV and knows how to buy cost effectively. So they helped us pull together a media plan. And then importantly, on the creative side, so this is where we worked with WPN. We actually hadn't worked with WPN Action for Children for a number of years. So so also through the process, this was you know, setting up a new agency relationship. So, and I must say WPN helped us do this incredibly quickly. So, and this is where we've relied on their expertise with their creativity. And we did actually approach a few agencies, and actually, you know, some agencies at the moment actually just on the logistics just don't have the agility to do this. But we were lucky enough to find WPN who had thought about how to work in these extraordinary circumstances. And actually they did work for us over the Easter weekend. So this is why I feel very, very grateful to them, helping us get us on air. So anyway, we'll just show the ad next, I think. And you can see for yourself what's airing today.
I see firsthand UK families at breaking point. Now that the coronavirus crisis has hit, they need urgent help. They were struggling to feed their children before this started. Now, overnight, so many have lost their incomes. They are really frightened. Action for Children has thousands of key workers across the UK working on the front line, helping the most vulnerable families and children, and they need your help today. Please give £10 now at actionforchildren.org.uk to give them the essentials: food, nappies, cleaning products. Your gift will help families in urgent need get through this difficult time. Coronavirus has thrown all of our lives, our communities and the UK into crisis. I am desperately worried. Children are suffering now. They need our help quickly. Please give £10 now at actionforchildren.org.uk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing that really powerful ad with us. We are going to move straight into questions now. Apologies, we are running a little over. We're just going to allow kind of 5 to 10 minutes for some of the questions that have come through. So the first, well, we've had a few questions around kind of the timeframes for videos and what your recommendations are there. So really, what is the ideal time frame and how does that differ for the different channels that people might use, particularly social versus digital versus obviously DRTV?
Okay, so
I'm not sure if anyone's answering that question at the moment. I think people might be on mute.
okay, so I'm on Newsy. Can you hear me, Emily?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hi, it's John. Yes, of course, the time frame can vary greatly depending on the assets you have, the process we need to go through. So if you have existing footage that we need to turn into a video for social media, then obviously that's the quickest and the most agile piece of work we can do, and we could do that within a number of days. If it's producing an ad for TV, where there are many elements to consider, Clearcast, for example, there is the scripting and the writing, which Maria will go through. There's the production capturing, the voiceover artists, all these things can come into play. So the speediest I think we've managed to get an ad from start to finish is about 2.5 to 3 weeks. So that is extraordinary, and that is with a following wind and all our ducks in a row. But yeah, as you say, these are extraordinary times, and I think people are moving backwards to be as agile as possible. So yeah, it can vary the time. That's the answer to the question. It can vary.
Okay, great. And then there's, you know, throughout this, there were some references to kind of user-generated content and getting supporters to use their own phones, etc. So I guess, how do you recommend people engage with their supporters to encourage them and empower them to do that? And also, how do you moderate the content that they might produce?
Who wants to take that one?
Bob, do you want to take that one?
Moderating content. Is Bob or Maria, one of you?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it kind of depends what you're going to use that content for. So if you're going to put it on a microsite or on your website, obviously you want to put in some processes that enable you to check out everything that's been uploaded before it goes live. If you're asking people to record things with the intention of using it in an appeal film, I think the important thing, firstly, is to give them clear directions on what to do. I think you need to control their expectations, in so much as just by filming something and sending it to you doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to appear in the finished item. And then it's just about giving them some clear guidance, sort of like we talked about earlier, in terms of how best to film using a smartphone. In today's context, I think the quality of the film itself doesn't matter at all. It's about the emotion and the content of their contributions.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what we tend to do with TV, for TV, it tends not to be supporters so much as the workers, or it might be the CEO or something like that. We give them all the help we can in advance. If they want to film themselves on their own, that is fine. But we ask them to send the film over to us, and then we might make some comments and ask them to refilm it or do it slightly differently. But we're actually going to be filming tomorrow with a celebrity supporter of a charity, and she's very happy to have everybody watching and helping her on Zoom. So you know, every case is individual, really.
Great, okay. And thank you, Marcus, for your question. We've had a few around this. I know this is often a difficult one to answer, but what kind of costs or budgets do you think people need to allow for to do this kind of work?
I was actually just in the process of responding to Marcus, so thank you for the question. And I know this will be at the front of a lot of people's minds, having seen a range of content today. There is no, very simple rate card answer for you. It will very much depend on the process we need to go through, the production process. And very importantly, it also comes down to the assets we have to work with. So if there's filming involved, if there are voices to capture, if we need to send someone with an iPhone, which obviously we can't do in lockdown, but the process we go through will very much determine the level of price. So from a TV commercial to a straightforward, very short 15-second social media film, I mean, you can imagine that there's a very wide disparity within cost. So I would say to you, as a very, very rough guide, so for a couple of £1,000 for a very rough edit for a 15-second social media ad, and that can be maybe several times more for a short existing footage DRTV commercial. So we have to look at the assets, and very, very, very happy to quote on what you might be looking to use.
Great, thank you. Thanks for all the questions that have come in. We are looking to do more around the questions that we've had from today's webinar and previous webinars that we've had so far. So more news on that coming soon. Back to Keith.
Yes, thank you very much, Brent. If you could just move to the last slide. Upcoming sessions are next Tuesday, which is going to be around tribes, community and audience engagement. I would just like to finish to say thank you so much for WPNC, Action for Children, and all of our contributors, all of the attendees. Thank you so much for your time. We are genuinely here to help in any way we can. Please reach out to us anytime, any question. We'll be following up the next 24 hours with the recording and a recap to summarize everything for you. Thank you so much. And I would just like to finish by saying, please stay safe. And just remember, together, anything is possible anywhere. It doesn't matter. Let's just get things done. Thank you.